Hello, guys. Um, Welcome to today's live stream. Basically, we are going to be looking at modules in Rust, right? Then we'll take it a step further and look at crates, cargo, and attributes. Um, so we are going to kind of like do a combination of a lot of things, not just one thing. We're going to um, be, be looking at a lot of things. Following the series, so we've been going through this series. We've done primitives, custom types, variable bindings, types, conversion expressions, flow of control, functions, and now we are at this point where we are looking at modules. So today we'll be looking at modules, creates, and cargo as well as attributes, right? So these are um, smaller chapters in the Rust by example book. So we'll just be going over them and also look at crates, also look at cargo. Cargo is kind of like npm. When you compare it to the JavaScript ecosystem, right? And then we'll then finally look at attributes and all of that. So the live stream is going to so that's how we are going to do it. So once again, welcome everyone to my live streams. You're seeing this from if you're seeing this, okay, everything I'll drop the YouTube link right now. Um, but you should be able to see the YouTube link on Twitter. So so if I go to X, so you should be able to see it here. So this is the YouTube link, but I'll still drop it in the chat for anyone who is interested. So you click on this, takes you to YouTube.
You should be
So
able to see it. Yeah.
I'll send it. So you have the YouTube link in the chat. So I'll just pin this to the top, right? And also show it by the side of um, yeah. So let me just hide it. But everything you have that link, so you can always take a look at it. Use it to stream directly from YouTube if you want. Okay, guys. So let's get into it. Let's get into it. So today, like I said, we're going to be looking at modules. So we'll be looking at modules, crates, cargo, and attributes. Once again, guys, welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome to if you're watching from Twitter or LinkedIn, say welcome, and let's get right into it. So, if you have been following my streams, you will notice that we have like a folder structure we follow. So for today, we're going to be using the modules file. So there is a modules.rs, and it's been imported into this place as a module and made public, so that we'll be able to import it in the main.rs file, right? So we'll be able to do modules, and we just want everything. Yeah, so we'll be able to use it here, and with that, we'll be able to get any public function in that module. So it's quite funny that we'll be talking about modules today, and I just spoke about modules, but at the same time, it's going to be a really theoretical live stream. It's not really going to be like other live streams that we usually have. But then again, right, we will be doing some things that are really you know, technical. We'll be looking at some technical things like we'll be, building a graph. Looking at a graph data structure later in the day, and later in the evening we'll be trying our hands on building a text editor, specifically focusing on the redo and undo feature, right? To kind of apply the stack data structure that we had done, I think, about 2 weeks ago, where we implemented a stack in Rust. So we'll be doing that in these streams. So we'd have more, fun live streams. Yeah, you know, so we'll have more fun live streams coming on. So let me just reply. Right, right. So I'll try my possible best to explain a lot of things. I don't have a visual aid to assist me in my explanations, but I'll try my possible best to explain as much as I can. Right. So modules in Rust are like the building blocks of Rust as a language. Right. So it says here that um, Rust provides a powerful module system that can be used to split code into logical units, right, and manage visibility, both public and private, between them, right. So um, a well structured code base, right, would definitely contain three things, right. Would have um, very strong separation of concerns that is logically done, which would in turn make the application to be like easy to maintain, right. Um, a well structured code base would control visibility, right? Keeping some implementations public and keeping some private, right? Um, a well-structured code base would manage namespaces, thereby preventing or avoiding conflict. In Rust, every file, right, just like we've seen here, every file is a module, right? So every file is a module in Rust. But in these modules, right, we can still create nested modules manually, right? So modules are used to group related functionalities together, preventing namespace conflicts and keeping the code organized, like I mentioned. So once again, guys, like I said, today's live stream, especially this particular one, is going to be really, really, really theoretical, right? So it will be really theoretical. So forgive me, but we'll still write code, right? We'll still write some code, but mainly we'll just be stepping through modules to down to attributes, right? For maybe by next week we'll go into generics, and this is where we'll spend a lot of time because generics is big, right? It's a big subject, a big topic to talk about. Then, so I think that's basically it, right? So let's declare a module. Let's declare a module. So first things first, would how we declare a module is by using the mode keyword, right? So we have mod, so it's a reserved keyword. So we want to create a something like a restaurant and group everything together, right? So we say mode rest. We're using like eateries as example. So in this our module, we've created a module with this. We want to create a public module. So in order to do that, we'll use the word pub. So pub is for public and mode. So we want, for instance, a kitchen, right? So our kitchen in the restaurant is public, right? Then in that kitchen, we want to create a function, and we want this function to be public. So we'll create a public cooking function. So we'll say pub. Sorry about that. Fn. Then we'll call this function cook, right? And that's basically it. So this function, right? We can just go ahead and then print line. So let's just print line. We are cooking, right? Then we can also create a private function here, right? For instance, what would be a private function in our um, a private thing in our kitchen? Our recipe is going to be private, right? You don't want. So if I have a special recipe for making pizza or making a goosey soup or something, right? I don't want that recipe to be. It's kind of like sharing my trade secret, right? So I don't want it. I don't want everybody to know about my recipe. So I want it to be private. And by default, all functions are everything is private until you use the pub keyword on it. So we'll just create a simple function and we'll call it private recipe. And then we can just copy this. Say don't share. We can say do not share with three exclamation mark to state how important or how serious it is, right? So I would increase the size of my screen. Okay. So guys, please let me know if my streams are if it's now like clearer, right? Like compared to previous streams that we used to have. So one of the complaints I got was that my streams were usually very blur. So just let me know. Let me know because I'm trying to understand if it is a Twitter thing or if it's a if it's a streaming software I'm using, right? But I believe it's a Twitter thing. I don't really know, but I believe it's a Twitter thing. So yeah, so with this we've created, right? This restaurant is public, is a module, right? And in that restaurant we have a module again, a kitchen module that is public. Then we have a function that is cook, right? That is public. And we have a private recipe without the pub keyword, right? So I'll just add a comment here and say this is private. Uh, this is a private FM, or this is private. Just call it this is private. And the reason it's private is because we're not using the pub keyword. So moving on, if in our restaurant, let's say after because everything's happening in the restaurant, right? So logically, after we've cooked, right, in our public kitchen, of course the kitchen is public because everybody that works as a staff has access to the kitchen, right? So either to serve food, make food, maybe as a chef, as a waiter or a waitress, something, right? After doing that, we want to somehow serve that food to the public, and that is like a public functionality. So we'll create a public function. So we'll use pub, we'll say serve, and this function um, this function would then um, would then call the kitchen function and cook, right? So it would either tell us in a real world situation, to either tell us if the person is still cooking or the food is ready or something, right? But because we are focusing on modules and how they work in Rust, we'll not be going into all that fun functionality. So what we'll do here would say kitchen. I have this kitchen. So we want to access everything that is public in the kitchen, right? So we know that cook is public, but function is not public. You can already see that my Rust analyzer suggests that to me. So I would pick it, right? So this is how, add a comment here, I can access the cook function that is in kitchen. So I'll add a comment here saying accessing the function within the module. So say accessing the function within the kitchen module. Right. So what are the key takeaways here? The key takeaway one first is module defines mode, right, is used to define a module, right? And you have to think of it like a folder. So you just have to think of everything that is wrapped here, right, as a folder. So wherever I put a module, you just have to think of it as a file of its own, a separate file um, of its own, right? By default, on that another takeaway again is that by default, everything is private unless explicitly made public by using the pub keyword. Um, the last thing to take note of is that when you nest modules, it creates a kind of a hierarchy, right? Creates a hierarchy in the namespace. So these are things to um, take note of. So I would add a comment for them. So I would say I'll call this key takeaways. So the first one is um, mode defines a module. So you just have to think of it like a folder. By default, everything is private. So by everything is private unless marked public using PUB. Then the last but not the least, nesting. Nesting modules creates um, a hierarchy. So hierarchical hierarchical okay, name space. Yeah, so these are the key takeaways to take note of, right? Why we use modules the way we use it. So we'll save this and we'll move on. So let's create so next we can look at another example, right? Let's look at another example. In this case, we'll create something like a library. And we know that in a library, so the reason I'm doing this is just to solidify the concept, right? So we'll create a library, and this library, we know that the library would have books in it, right? It would have books. It would have each book will have like a title and the name of the author, just in the basic form, right? So we want to do that in this same file, right? And how do we do that? So first of all, we create. Remember, I said modules. So I'll take this to the top. Comments. Adding comments is very important. All right. So remember, I said that um, you know you have to think of modules as like folders, right? So let's say we want to create another folder in this our folder. So we create a module and I said we wanted to create a library. So library, right? So library. All right. So very simple. So we've automatically created like a folder here. So this is a module of its own. So in this place, like I said, we want to create in our library. In a library, we have books, and that book each book would have like a title and a string. So we want to use a struct. So we'll make that struct to be public. So public struct. We'll call it book. And we want people to know the name of the book, of course. So it has to be public. So say public, and we'll say title, title, and obviously it's going to be a string, and the author's name is also public. So public, say author name, or just author. That's explanatory enough. And it's also going to be a string, right? We can even go ahead to create like an ISBN number, right? But let's just keep it simple. Let's keep it really, really, really simple. Now, this is our struct, right? Next thing we'll do is whenever we create a struct, we always have to like write an implementation on it, right? So we also look at implementations. I think we already did that in our um, I think we already did that in one of our past this thing live streams. Here we talked about structs and implementation, custom types, right, and all that, all those things. Yeah, we talked about structures and custom types. I know we did that, so we talked about it. We also looked at how to create structures and stuff. I can't remember if we did anything like with implementations, but I know it is something that we talked about. But then again, let's just move on so we don't digress too far. So now we are going to write an implementation block, and that implementation we are going to write. We are writing it on the book struct, right? So we're going to write a function that is going to help us create new books, right? So basically, it will just help us create a book with a title and an author name. So just for testing purpose, right? Nothing really serious or nothing really crazy. So we use the impl keyword for the book, and that's it. So with this, we now have to write a function. So we say function new. This new function is going to take two things. It's going to take the title and the author's name, both of which are going to be string slices, right? It's going to take the author's name and then going to take the author's name and the title of the book. So here we'd say title, ITLE, title, and it's going to be a reference to a string slice. Same thing for the author. It's going to be a reference to a string slice. Yeah, so that's basically it. And this function wants you to return self, return self, and in there we then want to self, and so here we'll then pass in our missing titles. It's already telling us that we have missing titles. So we'll pass our title and we'll pass our author and want them to be strings. So title, so we'll say title, title dot to underscore string string. And we'll do the same thing for author, same thing to string. Yep. We'll save this. Right. So now we have so of course this function has to be public, right? So we want it to be accessible outside of the this thing. Yeah, thanks, Chinedu. Thank you for that. Um, all right, so as I was saying, the next we want to somehow use our function, right? We can go ahead to write helpers that would help us um, you know that would help us log or print our titles and stuff. But like I said, don't want to really go crazy with what we have here. So I'm trying as much as possible to keep it simple, right? Trying as much as possible to keep it simple without going really, really crazy and taking a lot of time in the process. So as I was saying, um, so as I was saying, um, we we don't want to really, really go crazy on a lot of things. So I'm just trying as much as possible to keep it simple. So next we are going to write a you know another mode in our like another module in our library um module, right? So what is just going to basically help us print things and stuff, right? So um we don't really want to go crazy on that, right? I don't really want to go crazy on that, but I can go ahead and write like um you know another function that helps us to print the title, and then we can write like a another module that is going to be public that is going to help us um print the that is going to help us handle management, right? So basically it's going to do the it's going to okay guys, sorry for the little break in transmission. So we'll just okay, so let me just go ahead and write these functions instead of just trying to escape it. So I'll create another mode and I'll call this help us. So I'll just call it help us because it's obviously going to help do something. So here I would say pub function, and what it would do is it would format the title, right? So this would I'll just call it format. I'll say format and this title is going to be a reference to a string, and it's going to return a string. To return the string. So we'll just call the normal format macro, and in there just pass this and I'll pass our title. Right. So the purpose of writing all this is not because we want to um you know get to test it or get to see it run or something. The purpose is to be able to understand how the whole hierarchy stuff works, right? So that's the purpose of what we're doing here. Understand how the whole hierarchy stuff works and how to use it in our projects, right? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So next we are going to write another public function, and what this public function will do for us is it will be like a sorry, we're going to write another module, And this module will help us with management, right? Like for adding of books. So you can go ahead and say mode, and we want this, or say public first. I want to be public, and to be a module, and say management, and we'll write a public function to add books, right? So we say add book, and in there want to print, use the print macro, and we'll say um, adding a new book, adding a new book. All right. So what have we done here? So first we created, like I said, we created a book struct, right? So it's still the same struct we have been creating all this while, right? In all other of our projects, right? When we do things like stacks, when we build stacks or queues or do DFS, that is depth first search and stuff, where we use structs a lot. See the same thing, right? The only difference now is that we appended public to it, which is a keyword, right, in Rust. So if we go back to this place, we can see, let's look at visibility. You can see it here, right? So it's the same thing, right, that you see in the Rust by example book. So nothing different. The PUB means this function is public, right? So if you take a look at this, you will see that um, the book struct, right here, this guy is public. We made him public, allowing access to its fields, right? The helpers in this case, this particular function, um, right? The helpers remains private to the module, right? So this helpers itself is private to the library module itself, right? So it is not accessible outside of the library itself, right? Um, Management itself is public and can be used outside of the library module, right? It can be used outside of the library module. So this is just like a hypothetical example of how this can be used. So now let's go over to um, you know not really going over. So we'll now focus on talking about or explaining visibility in Rust, right? So in Rust, privacy is more than just the public and the private stuff that I've been talking about. There are several levels of access control that lets us manage code visibility across modules and crates. Understanding these modifiers would help us in designing clear APIs and enforcing something that we call encapsulation. Right, it's a very well-known concept in programming. So we can even look up what it means. Right. So let's quickly look that up. We'll say um, encapsulation. So basically, the action of enclosing something in or as in a capsule, right? So if we do it in the concept of OOP, that is object-oriented programming. So in object-oriented programming, encapsulation is a practice of bundling related data into structured units, right? Along with methods used to work with that data. So most OOP languages implement encapsulation primarily through classes and objects instantiated through those classes, right? So this is one of those things we'll be looking at right now at this moment. Um, Encapsulation, basically, right? So back to so the reason I show all these things is so that people feel comfortable and don't feel like maybe this person knows everything. I don't, right? Most of these things are gotten from you know the Rust by example book, um, you know, past knowledge, um, and my own personal research, right? At the end of the day. So now, um, there are different levels of visibility, like I mentioned, right? For instance, if we write a function like this, so let's say we let me give an example. Say example, create a function. So this is a public module, and I'll call it example. And in this model, I'll create a public function. So this is a public function. I'll call it A, just an empty function. So this is going to be this is not correct. So I'll just call this public function. So this is a public function, right? Um, so this is a public function. Then we'd also look at how it can be visible within this module alone, right? So let's say, for instance, um, so we'll write some code and then we'll use like a real world example to explain, right? So if we have something like this is a public function. If we have something like this, so say pub, and then we have let's say in crate, so say have something like a crate example, and then here we have our function. Let's say we have another function called b, right? So this function um, is visible to the entire only within this module, right? So we say it's visible only within this module. Then if we have something like this, let's say pub, we have create, right? And in there we have another function called it C, right? So this C function is visible to the entire crate, right? So say visible entire crate. Then if we have something like this, so there's a keyword called super, super. So this is visible only to the parents module. So the parent module will be a module that is wrapping the example module, right? Visible parent module, and then this one will then be finally our private function. So E, right? So it should be private by default. So this is private by default. So once again, let's go over this. So what we have here is a public function, right? What we have here, so where we have um, something like this, so we have in create example, just like an example, right? So We are saying in this place, right? Inside this place, and then we are appending it to the name of our module, which is example. So that function will only be visible within this place, right? And when we use just the create keyword like this, it will be visible to the entire crate, right? And when we use super, this function will be visible to the parent module. So any other module that is wrapping the example module, right? So let's say, for instance, we'll create another module. Let's say pub mode example one. So we'll do something like this, and we copy this guy and place him in here. So we can still have other functions here. So let's say other things here. So it's not only functions that can be public, so other things here, right? So this particular line where we use the super keyword, so pub parenthesis super before the function name, or even if it's a struct or something, it's only going to be visible outside here, right? Then finally, this one is private by default. So I'm going to try as much as possible to create like a real world analogy to explain this, or So guys, please forgive me. I said this today's live stream is really going to be a lot theoretical, right? It's going to be very theoretical, and that is what it is. So we'll be writing more code later on, later in the day, but fortunately not now. But then again, right? Let's make do with what we have, what we've got. So as I was saying, I'll give like a real world analogy of this, and we'll use that to see how to kind of understand, um, you know, the whole module stuff, right? Because this is the key to writing really um, easy to maintain applications and stuff, right? So now let's do the real world analogy. So say I'll call this real world analogy. So wherever you see something like this, pub, just know that it is open to the public. So we'll say it's open to, the public. So this is like the main entrance, right? Next, whenever you see something like this, so we have pub and a crate. So say crate. Um, so we can say what is it called again? Say this would be a case of employees only. So let's say employees only, but we say company wide access. Company wide access. Next, when we see something like this, say public, and there is a path. So in and then the path, right? Kind of how we try to do it here. So this would now be like kind of in that company, this will be department kind of access. So maybe people in higher departments would have access to this, right? So department specific access. Then when we have something like this, so where we have super, so pub, just reuse this and change this to super. Have this. So this is kind of restricted to immediate immediate team. So it's restricted to immediate team. So only the parent module has access to this. And module has access to this. Right. So if we take this ahead, right? Um, if we, for instance, um, example. So in a case where we try to call this, or sorry, this outside of this model, it would break, right? Because it is visible only within this model, right? It's visible only within this place. So, so a similar part exists in modules. Yeah. So I was just showing that example. That's why I wrapped it. So I'll just take this out and take this out. Save. Let's see. All right. I still have that similar part exists modules. Okay. So the name has to let me use modules. See what happens. Resolve import modules relative paths. I'll say create relative paths and also okay. So we have to do create modules and example. So if we let's create a function. So we'll say so this our function is also going to be a public function. So we'll say pub test. So we'll just call it test mode, right? And in here, um let's do example. So we'll say first off before we continue, save this. Sorry. Save this and we'll do cargo fmt. Oh, sorry, public fn oversight. We'll do cargo fmt, format that code. All right. So this is okay. So now in this place, this particular um, test module will then import it. All right. Run cargo fmt again. So in our main function, we already have modules here. So under here, we'll just go ahead and import test modules. So test mode, comment out function. I'm no longer interested in that guy. Same for this. So now, if we go back to our modules, I'll close this and this, close this. So here, if we call, if we do something like examples, let's say example, we're trying to access the guys that are public. So example would see that we have A, C, and D, but we don't have E and B as a suggestion. So if we do for A, and we call it right, we save. And when I do cargo run, so it will compile fine, right? So it compiles fine. The code will compile fine. But when I try to access B, so let's say example, and I try to access B, I already get an error saying probably it's not public or something. Let's save and see what happens. So we're already getting that error that says function B is private. It's a private function, right? So if I even take it a step further and still run the code, everything breaks to abyss. Exactly. So we have here's our error. Yeah. So it says function B is private, right? So you cannot get access to it. So I'll just add a comment there saying um, this works. So compile error. So like I said, trying to call the B function outside of that module that is outside of this place, right? Um, would break the application because it is only visible within this module. So just take note of how you can make a particular function to be encapsulated within this particular. So that takes us back to that definition of encapsulation, right? So it takes us back to that definition. So this is how you can write functions and encapsulate them in a certain module. And remember, I said modules are like files, right? Every file automatically in Rust is a module, right? So this is how you can um, achieve that. So understanding visibility would help avoid this kind of errors. So that's why I felt this was important for for me to talk about this live stream. So let's look at struct visibility and encapsulation. So what we just looked at now is just we just looked at the different levels of visibility, right? So I would add a comment here for that. Different levels of visibility. So next we are going to look at structs. We're going to look at structs this thing visibility. So we would say struct visibility, struct visibility, and encapsulation. All right. So what we'll do here is we'll create a user struct, right? Where the username is public but the email is private. Validation logic is going to be handled inside the methods, right? So what you're trying to do now is I'll say let's create. So I'll say I'll just call it. I'll say tax. So this is just a tax which is create a user struct where username is public, email obviously is private. Nothing that could be private in this case is password. And the validation logic is handled right, inside the method. Right. This is the task we have to create. Right. So first thing we want to do is let's create a struct first. Right. So let's create a struct called user. Right. And we know that this struct um they said create, so we are creating a struct called user, and the username is going to be public. So we'll say we use the pub keyword and so username, make it a string, and email is going to be private. I don't know what I'm doing today. I'm just all over the place.